Hey delegates, so we will be continuing with the MUN workshop, and now we will be discussing MUN procedure as a second part of the workshop, right? And this is something that I guess all of you, especially the first time delegates, would be really looking forward to. Now I'm going to try and discuss MUN procedure as briefly as possible, right? In the shortest possible time, right? Covering all possible aspects, and of course this is UNA USA procedure, right? There are a few variations, few additions that are going to take place to it, but as such it is UNA USA procedure as a whole, right? So let's start off now. So if I was really to think about MUN procedure, I divided it into 7 main parts, right? There are 7 main parts according to me. The first part is research, right? The second part is lobbying. The third part is motions. The fourth part is points and rights. The fifth part is voting. The sixth part is draft resolutions. And the sixth part is in committee formal documentation, not including draft resolutions, right? So this is just the way I divide it, right? Different people will divide it differently, but this is my division for MUN procedure, and I believe in including research as a part of it because that is very important, and it also has a method to it which must be followed by all of them, right? So a lot of it would probably have sounded like gibberish to some of the first time delegates, but don't worry, I will be covering each one of these 7 points that I've talked about, right? We will start off with research, which in my belief is the most important part of MUNs. Now, MUNs are based on agendas which in general require quite a bit of research from various different standpoints. So let's take the example of the situation in Nigeria in the United Nations Security Council at TIMUN 2014, right? So if you really are a delegate of, let's say, Sudan is a country in Africa, let's say you all are delegates of Sudan discussing the situation in Nigeria in the UNSC at TIMUN 2014, you will have to carry out a lot of research before you come to the MUN. Now the amount of research that you need to carry out will vary from person to person, but research, if I was to divide it, would be of 3 types. We would really have country specific research, we would have committee specific research, and agenda specific research, right? So let's discuss country specific research firstly. Now let's say you're Sudan discussing the situation in Nigeria. You would really have to find out how your nation is going to be affecting the agenda under discussion. What is the role your nation has to play? What is your relation with the different member nations who are probably party to the dispute? What are the possible steps that your foreign policy would allow you to take in relation to this agenda? And what is your country's stance in general? So these are basic points. Of course, there's a lot of other detail. What have been your past decisions in relation to draft resolutions of the UN? What have been your past relations with these member nations? You really need to research on all these different points. And this is what really comes under country-specific research. The second form of research that I call is committee-specific research. So if you look at the United Nations Security Council, I've already discussed a part of the committee-specific research, what the UNSC is, what it does. It deals with issues related to international peace and security. So you'd really have to look at the committee-specific research. So if we are talking about the situation in Nigeria, and since we are discussing it in the UNSC, you would have to deal with the aspects related to international peace and security which might be threatened as a result of such activities in Nigeria. Okay? If the food crisis or the oil crisis or scarcity of any other resource or civil war or any other issue of this sort in Nigeria is a threat to international peace and security, it will be discussed in the UNSC. So that's what I really call committee specific research, right? Specific to the agenda, specific to the committee, right? And the third aspect is, of course, agenda specific research. This is the most important form of research. You really deep dive into research related to the agenda. We have comprehensive study guides that are going to be forming a part of all committees, right? And for each agenda. So we'll have a lot of agenda specific research, but beyond that, you will need to research a lot more as well, right? So the study guide will basically provide you with a basis for research. Beyond this, you probably have to look at different websites. I don't really have a problem with delegates going on to Wikipedia for research. Of course, that's something you cannot cite in the United Nations, in the MUNs rather, but definitely that's a good place to start research off with. And then you go to more specific websites, more universally recognized and verifiable websites, probably something like the CIA fact book. That's of course not universal, but nonetheless, UN affiliated websites, Reuters. There are various different websites of this sort which provide you research that might have some kind of evidence, right? So you must go on to these different websites and research further, right? But what will be really accepted in committee, if a point of order, I'll discuss points of order a little later, but what will really be accepted in committee are only Reuters reports and reports from various UN websites, right? Probably the UNICEF website or the UNESCO website or whatever it is, right? So these are the only things that will hold as proper evidence. So you have complete right to speak and base your opinion based on your research from anywhere. The study guide is a very important basis too, as mentioned, right? So research is something that you probably have to start carrying out. If you are very diligent from now itself, 2 months before the MUN, right? Take your time, do it slowly and steadily. And the fact is that it is a wonderful process. It's a very fulfilling process. It is something wherein you get to learn a lot. And this, in my belief, is ethos of MUNs. You get to broaden your outlook, you get to expand your horizons, you get to master negotiation skills, you get to network. There are a lot of things that make MUNs a very, very attractive proposition. We'll be going into all of this a little later, but let's go on with research. So research is something that you can start off from now itself. I suggest you all start off from now and divide into 3 parts: to the committee, country and agenda specific research separately. It will help you all a lot more, right? So this was as far as research is concerned. Before I get on to the second aspect of MUNs, I'd really tell you all what you all are going to be doing in MUNs. So in MUNs, you will have these agendas as discussed. They will be under discussion. You will be representing these various member nations in the different committees. Say in the UNSC, you will be one of these 15 member nations, right? It might be USA, it might be UK, you might be one of the 10 rotating member nations, alright? And you will be representing the stance of that particular member nation, right? You do not represent your personal opinion. This is one of the major differences between debates and MUNs. In MUNs, you represent the opinion of the country you are representing. This often might be a huge challenge. For example, say you are representing Pakistan and you are discussing the issue of Kashmir, in the UNSC, right? So you are not going to be representing your view as an Indian, which will be pretty pro-India in my belief. You will be actually representing the views of Pakistan, right? It's quite a challenge, but it really helps us broaden our outlooks and think from both sides of the spectrum, It makes us a lot more broad-minded. Nonetheless, we'll be continuing. The second aspect of MUN procedure, as I discussed, is lobbying. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, lobbying. This is probably the most important part of MUNs when you really come to an MUN. Research is something you do before you sit in the MUN conference. Once you get to the MUN conference, lobbying is the most important part of the MUN. So what do you do in lobbying? When you come to an MUN, you will have various delegates, various competent delegates representing various member nations. Each one of those member nations would have their own stance related to the topic. Since we are talking about the situation in Nigeria, let's say the delegate of Nigeria will have a particular stance, the delegate of the United States will have a particular stance, the delegate of China in most cases will have a stance which is opposite to that of the delegate of the US. So different countries, the world politics is very complicated, alright, and the dimensions, the scenarios, the equations, they keep changing, right, and with each agenda they differ, right. So what happens is, if you are a delegate of a particular member nation, you are actually going to be working towards collaborative problem solving in an MUN. So you need to talk to all the different delegates around. You have to lobby well with them. You have to understand their point of view. You have to impart your point of view to them, and you have to try and convince them to follow your stance, right? So this is what really happens in lobbying. It is something that happens before an MUN. When you meet the delegates, you really talk to them, you understand what their stance is, you tell them what your stance is, you talk to them about possible solutions, you try and extract as much information as possible from them about what they're going to be doing in committee, right? What is the flow of committee they'd like, and then you understand in which direction is committee headed. You understand who your allies are, you understand who your enemies are. Probably if you are not well researched, you might get an opportunity to get a lot of research from all the remaining delegates while lobbying. So you really need to speak up during the period of lobbying. Speak to your fellow delegates. This is generally not moderated by a chairperson, right? You're free to move around in committee and talk to your delegates. So this is what really happens in lobbying, right? It is very important that you not only find your allies and speak to them, but you also speak to your enemies, because when you get to understand all the views of your enemies, and you might get to develop defense mechanisms accordingly, right? So lobby well, and since it is about collaborative problem solving, lobbying is the first step towards it, right? So lobbying happens even before committee starts. It happens during committees, during informal sessions, informal debate, unmoderated caucuses, specifically during lunch times. So all the times that you get to speak to delegates when committee is not in order would probably form part of lobbying, according to me, right? So this was the second aspect of MUN. Now we come to the remaining aspects of MUN procedure. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try and run you through an actual MUN. Okay. So now what happens is that once you have finished your research, let's say committee is supposed to start at 10, you come at 9 o'clock, all the delegates meet, they lobby in the manner that I have mentioned. Post that, there will be somebody called a chairperson, right? There's an executive board for every committee. There will be a chairperson, the vice chairperson, a rapporteur who handles research, or a substantive director, whatever it is. There will be this set of 3 to 4 people who will be adjudicating on all points, all matters in committee, and will be moderating debate in committee, ensuring that debate moves forward. And they will also be your judges. They will be actually selecting the best delegate, the high commendations, the special mentions, and so on and so forth, right? In a way, you can call them the judges as well as the moderators in committee, right? So this is what the executive board is, and they are seated at the front of the entire committee room, right? You all as delegates will be seated in committee, probably in alphabetical order or in random order, whatever the organizing committee of the MUN deems fit. And you will be sitting along with something called a placard, right? You get a placard, it looks like something like this, right? And it will have your name written, and every time you want to speak out in committee, you have to raise your placard like this, right? And I will be explaining everything beyond this to you all, but nonetheless, this is the basic. You obviously have to come in formal attire, you have to come well dressed, alright? I will not go into the different types of formal attire allowed, but well, formal attire is what is important, right? Now, you have to pay respect to the executive board. Their decisions are final, even if you disagree with them, alright? And you have to trust that they will take the correct decisions to move committee forward, right? So now once you take your seats, the chair will be seated along with his vice chairperson, his substantive director, and beyond this, what will happen is once you have taken your seats, he will take the attendance. Now when he takes your attendance, every delegate is free to either say present or present and voting. Now if a delegate says that he or she is present, they are allowed to abstain from voting on a draft resolution. Now this is something that I'll come to a little later. However, if a delegate says present and voting, that particular delegate is not allowed to abstain from voting on a draft resolution. That delegate either has to vote for or against it, right? So this was the basic about attendance. After this, the chairperson will say, delegates, are there any points or motions on the floor? Now if you recollect, motions was the third aspect of MUNing, which I had mentioned earlier. Now how are motions passed? Right? There are various different kinds of motions. The most basic motion is motion to begin proceedings for the day, or motion to begin committee for the day. So what is a person supposed to do? A delegate who wants to raise a motion when the chairperson asks for points or motions has to raise his or her placard and state their motion. So in this case, you will have to raise a motion to begin proceedings for the day or motion to begin committee for the day, right? Now once you raise the motion, the chairperson will decide whether that motion is in order or not in order. In this case, if you raise a motion to begin proceedings for the day, the chairperson will allow that motion and say that that motion is in order. After the chairperson says that the motions are in order, or a particular motion is in order rather, the chairperson will ask for seconds and oppositions, right? So let's say you are a delegate and you say motion to begin proceedings for the day. The chairperson will say, yes delegate, that motions are in order. All those who want to second this motion, please raise your placards. Now what are seconds? Basically a person who's seconding a motion is a delegate who's probably in favor of the motion and would also like that motion to get passed. So any delegate, and more than one delegate can second a motion, any one or more delegates wishing to second the motion can raise their placards at that point in time. So the chairperson will say, all those seconding this motion, please raise your placards. Once all the delegates who want to second the motion raise their placards, the chairperson will say, all right delegates, all those wishing to oppose this motion, please raise your placards. So all those who are opposing the motion can simply raise their placards. Alright. So once the chairperson has taken seconds and oppositions, the chairperson moves on to vote on the motion. So the chairperson says, seeing seconds and oppositions, we will move into vote on this motion. All those in favor of this motion, please raise your placards. So all of you all who are in favor of this can raise your placards in that case. Alright. And if there is a simple majority, that motion will pass. Now what you do when you raise your placards when voting is asked for is called a procedural vote. You pass a procedural vote for any procedural matter, and everything is a procedural matter in MUNs apart from amendments to draft resolutions and voting on draft resolutions. So on all procedural matters you are entitled to a procedural vote. Even all the observers, all those delegates who represent certain bodies like the UNESCO, UNICEF, there are some committees that have them. All of you all are entitled to this procedural vote, and if there is a simple majority, then any motion can pass. Right? So I'll just go through the entire procedure, and this procedure is followed for every motion. I'll come to the different types of motions, but this procedure is followed for every motion. Alright. So a delegate raises the motion, the chair says that motion is in order or not in order. Alright. He asks for seconds, then he asks for oppositions, and then he moves into vote. A procedural vote, if there is a simple majority, that motion passes. Now please note delegates, right, this is very important. If there is no second for a motion, I mean if no delegate is seconding a particular motion, the motion does not move into vote, it directly fails. Because technically there is nobody who is supporting that particular motion or even seconding it, right? So if there is no second to a motion, the motion directly fails. If there is no opposition to a particular motion, that motion directly passes. So if there are seconds and when the chair asks for oppositions, if nobody opposes that motion directly passes. Okay. However, only if there are seconds as well as oppositions, a motion moves into vote. Right? This is something slightly more technical, but nonetheless. Right? So this was a motion to begin proceedings for the day. After this, the next motion is the motion to set the agenda. Alright? A motion to set the agenda. And generally committees like in TIMUN 2014 have two agendas. So which agenda has to be discussed first is decided by the motion to set the agenda, and you might decide as a delegate to set agenda 1 or set agenda 2, that's totally dependent. Alright. Once that motion is raised, there might be, the chair might adjudicate that motion to be in order. He'll ask for seconds and oppositions, and then for final vote on the motion. Alright. There are also various other procedures followed to decide which agenda is introduced. Sometimes 2 delegates are allowed to speak for and 2 delegates against introduction of a particular agenda or whatever it is. Now those specifics you'll really get into when you have your chairperson in your own committee, and he will also explain these details to you all, right? These minor details. So once you have passed a motion to set the agenda, and let's say the agenda is set in the UNSC to the situation in Nigeria, you have something called the GSL or the General Speakers List, which is on by default. Alright, it is introduced on the floor as soon as an agenda is decided. So once the agenda is decided, you are on the General Speakers List. Every delegate is free to speak on the General Speakers List. You have to give your names to the chair when the chair asks for delegates who want to speak on the General Speakers List. You might pass a chit, or the chair might simply ask you all to raise your placards. Your names will be put up on the board, and in the order that your names are put up, you will get an opportunity to speak. As the name General Speakers List suggests, alright, it is a generalized speech related to the agenda. So in a General Speakers List, you will probably speak about your country, your stance related to the particular agenda, and how you want the committee to move forward, and probably a brief about possible solutions. Please note that the speech should, as I suggest, be very general. Okay, you get into the details as you further move on in committee. right? So this is what a general speakers list is. Now when you get an opportunity to speak, you get 90 seconds to speak. Okay, you have a total of 90 seconds. It is not essential to use up the entire 90 seconds. You might decide to use up only 45 seconds or 50 seconds or whatever it is, but you have a maximum time of 90 seconds to speak, right? So you come up, you speak up when your turn comes, and now if you don't use up your entire time, you have the opportunity to yield. Now there are 4 types of yields that are allowed. The first yield is yield to the chair. So if you use up 45 seconds and you have time left and you yield to the chair has the freedom to move on to the next delegate who has to speak on the general speakers list, or move on with procedure the way he would like to. So that is a yield to the chair. The second yield is yield to points of information. Now after giving your speech, if you would like to be open to questions from other delegates, you can yield to points of information or yield to questions. That is what it is called, right? I'm sorry, right? So if you yield to points of information, based on the amount of time left, the chair might entertain questions from 1, 2, 3 delegates sitting in committee, right? So those delegates will be free to question you based on whatever you have spoken or related to your stance, right? So that is yield to points of information. So we have discussed a yield to the chair and yield to points of information. The third type of yield is yielding your time to another delegate. Now let's say you have used up only 45 seconds of your total time. The remaining amount of time that you have is 45 seconds. So you can yield that amount of time to another delegate who is wishing to speak and probably is your ally. Let's say the delegate of the US has used up 45 seconds, he might yield to the delegate of the United Kingdom. This is just an example once again, right? So that is yielding your time to another delegate. And please note that the other delegate who you yield your time to only gets the remaining time to speak up on. Alright? So that's the third type of yield. And the fourth yield is not yielding at all. You are free to just keep mum post your speech getting over. Right? You are free to keep mum or say yield to comments. So if you do not yield at all by keeping mum or yield to comments, the chair, based on the amount of time left, may entertain 1, 2, 3 delegates to comment on the speech that you have just made. Alright? So there are 4 types of yields. A yield to the chair, wherein the chair can simply move on to the next delegate or procedure as he deems fit. Yielding your time to another delegate, which means if you have a particular amount of time left, you might yield it to another delegate to speak. Yielding to points of information or yielding to questions, wherein delegates will be free to question you. And the last one is not yielding at all, okay, or yielding to comments, which is when delegates will be allowed to comment on whatever you have spoken, right? So this is how a general speakers list actually works. Delegates keep coming up and speaking based on the order in which their names are put up on the board, and it keeps moving forward in this manner. So this is how committee generally starts. Now if you really have to get to a comprehensive resolution on an issue, you can't just keep having generalized speeches of this sort, right? You need to start getting into the specifics. Now getting into the specifics takes place through the process of caucusing in MUNs. They are called caucuses, okay? You might consider this a second or third aspect of MUNs as well, but it's called caucusing. I did not divide it into 7 broad categories, but caucusing is also very important, alright? Now to introduce a particular kind of caucus, there are motions once again, just like there are motions for various different things, alright? So once 4 or 5 delegates have spoken up on the general speakers list, the chair might say, alright delegates, we shall now be entertaining points or motions. Are there any motions on the floor? Alright, at this point in time, any delegate is free to stand up and introduce a caucus. Now caucuses are of 2 types. There are moderated caucuses and unmoderated caucuses. We'll be discussing moderated caucuses first. Caucuses in general are a form of informal debate. Technically they're called informal debate. General speakers lists are a part of formal debate. So a delegate might raise his or her placard and state motion to suspend formal debate and move into a moderated caucus. So a moderated caucus is basically a moderated debate and moderated informal debate rather. So in a caucus, delegates decide that we have discussed the topic as a whole for a long time. Now we need to get into the specifics. So let's say it's the issue of Kashmir. So now there are various issues in Kashmir, that's terrorism, rather extremism. there are border disputes, there are human rights violations. So let's say the particular delegate wants to discuss human rights violations in Kashmir, and he wants to discuss this only specifically, right? So you introduce a moderated caucus for it. So what do? So when the chair says, are there any points or motions on the floor, you raise your placard and say, motion to suspend formal debate and move into a moderated caucus. Now when you raise this motion for a moderated caucus, you have to do three things. Firstly, you have to state the topic. Alright, let's say if you're discussing the situation in Kashmir and you want to discuss human rights violations specifically, you say motion to suspend formal debate and move into a moderated caucus to discuss the issue of human rights violations in Kashmir. This is the first part. Then you have to state the total time. So the total time might be anything between 2 to 20 minutes. Okay. Please note that any moderated caucus cannot be introduced for a greater period than 20 minutes. Okay. So let's say you raise a motion to move into a moderated caucus to discuss the situation in Kashmir, human rights violations in Kashmir, for a total time of 20 minutes. This is the second part. And the third part is the speaker's time. So you have to mention the speaker's time. Generally, the speaker's time has to be such that when the total time is divided by the speaker's time, you get a whole number. This is slightly technical, but generally you raise a moderated caucus on a particular topic for a total time around 15 to 20 minutes with speaker's time 1 minute per speaker, right? The entire objective of this is that every delegate gets to speak as far as possible. But please note, delegates, it is quintessential that whatever you speak up is in relation to the topic of the moderated caucus, right? Moderated caucuses in that way are very specific to the topic, right? If you do not speak specific to the topic, there might be a chance that the chair might reprimand you, or a point of order might be raised by some of the other delegates sitting in committee, right? I will explain points a little later, but I think for now this should be enough to understand, right? What really happens then in course of time is you start discussing things out in the moderated caucus. Now please note, like in the GSL, there are yields. There are no yields in the case of moderated caucuses, right? So what happens is that once a motion is raised, probably the speaker or the delegate who has raised that motion gets the first opportunity to speak. Beyond this, the chair keeps recognizing people, or delegates rather, based on the order in which they raise their placards, right? So once a delegate finishes speaking, generally if the total speaker time is 20 minutes and the speaker time is 60 seconds, that particular delegate gets anything less than 60 seconds to speak up. Beyond that, he just has to sit down. He cannot yield even if he has time left, and the chair simply moves on to the next delegate. So let's say the delegate of India starts off by speaking because the delegate of India has raised the motion. Once the delegate concludes, the next delegate, let's say the delegate of Pakistan raises his or her placard, that particular delegate gets to speak up, right? So a moderated caucus goes on for the total period, whatever it is, 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And at the end of this, there are two options. Once the moderated caucus elapses, it means that the motion has elapsed, and the chair will ask for subsequent motions. Now there are various different kinds of motions that I had talked about yesterday, right? One of the options and one of the regular options, especially if delegates believe that the issue under discussion requires a lot more deliberation, a lot more debate, there might be a motion to extend that particular moderated caucus. So if the issue of human rights violations in Kashmir is being discussed, the delegates might feel that there is more discussion required, it is not complete. So any of the delegates seated can raise a motion to extend the moderated caucus. Once again, you don't need to state the topic here because you're extending the already existent moderated caucus. You'll simply have to state the total time and speaker's time. Technically, please note that the total time cannot exceed half the total time for the earlier moderated caucus. So since we were talking about the issue of human rights violations in Kashmir for a total time of 20 minutes and speaker time of 1 minute, the motion to extend the moderated caucus cannot exceed 10 minutes and speaker time can continue to be 1 minute. Alright, so this is slightly technical. Your chairs will obviously tell you about this once you come to committee, but I am letting you know nonetheless, right? So if you want to extend the moderated caucus, you're free to extend it, or you might go back to the general speakers list if no delegate is raising a motion. In such a scenario, the chair simply starts the general speakers list off again, and in the order that you all had put your names up, people get to continue to speak. Alright, there is one very important thing about the general speakers list. In an MUN, the general speakers list can never elapse. Okay, there has to be at least one speaker on the general speakers list at any point in time. because in the absence of the same, it means that discussion on the topic is over. This is because there are two types of debates in MUNs, formal debate and informal debate. All these caucuses form a part of informal debate. The general speakers list and another list called the special speakers list, which I'll not discuss here. It's not really used to a great extent in MUNs. It's specific and your chairs will explain it. So the general speakers list and special speakers list form a part of formal debate, while caucuses form a part of informal debate. Right? If there is no person on the general speakers list, it means that there's no formal debate that's required. Right? So technically the MUN elapses. So delegates, please note that at any point in time you should try and put your names up on the GSL. Right? It's important for further discussion. So apart from the motion for the moderated caucus and motion for extension of the moderated caucus, there are a lot of other motions. So as such, as per UNA USA procedure, there are only three points allowed, but we shall be entertaining 4 types of points, and I'll just come to them. So these 4 points are a point of order, a point of parliamentary inquiry, a point of information, and a point of personal privilege. I'll repeat it once again. A point of order, a point of parliamentary inquiry, a point of information, and a point of personal privilege. You can raise these points at any point in time in committee. However, 2 of these points in most cases are not allowed to interrupt a delegate who is speaking, while the other 2 are. However, this is once again to the discretion of the chair. If the chair believes that no point should interrupt a particular delegate speaking, then so be it. Right? So I'm going to explain these 4 points. You can raise them during a general speakers list, during the GSL, or you might also be allowed to raise them during a particular moderated caucus. Okay. So let's start off with the easiest point. That's the point of personal privilege. Now, a point of personal privilege can be raised if any delegate at any point in time is inconvenienced for any reason which is hindering his participation in committee. Now, inconvenience can be of many types. If a particular delegate who is speaking is inaudible, any other delegate in committee can raise a point of personal privilege addressed to the chair and state point of personal privilege. The chair will recognize you and you have to state that the particular delegate is inaudible or is speaking too fast, or there is too much of crosstalk in committee which is preventing you from listening to him, or whatever it is. The chair will then adjudicate upon that point and will decide whether it is in order or not in order, and he might give you that particular point of personal privilege or might state that that is not in order, right? So this is the way we move forward with the point of personal privilege. The next point is a point of parliamentary inquiry. A point of personal privilege, by the way, can interrupt a speaker, because obviously if a speaker is inaudible, you can raise it in the middle so that you can actually comprehend what he is saying. The next point that I'd like to discuss is a point of parliamentary inquiry. The point of parliamentary inquiry is raised when you have any doubt in relation to procedure. Any doubt, procedure is basically what I'm talking about at this point in time. So if you have any doubt related to procedure, any doubt related to a particular convention or how it can be applied, a treaty, the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, any of those sacrosanct documents for the United Nations, or procedural matters. This is what a point of parliamentary inquiry encompasses. Next point that I'd like to discuss is a point of information. In pure UNA USA procedure, a point of information is not really entertained, but we shall be entertaining it considering the number of first-time delegates, and in general we believe that a point of information is in a way a good way of ensuring that all delegates are on the same page along with the executive board too. So a point of information is raised when you have a particular doubt related to a factual inconsistency or in relation to research as a whole. So if we are discussing the issue of Kashmir, and I keep citing the issue of Kashmir because it makes it easier for Indian delegates to understand. So if you have a doubt in relation to the situation in Kashmir, for example, if you're not sure of the number of ceasefire violations that Pakistan has committed or India has committed and the number of ceasefire violations that have taken place recently, you are free to ask the chair, in which case you will have to raise a point of information which cannot interrupt any speaker who is speaking, right? You have to raise a point of information where no delegate is speaking up. You have to state point of information to the chair, and you have to frame this in a form of a question. It always has to be a question. You can state, is the delegate of, let's say I'm the delegate of Djibouti. Djibouti is a country in Africa. So you can state, is the delegate of Djibouti right in stating that there have been ceasefire violations that have been taking place in Kashmir, and ceasefire violations have taken place recently as well, right? The chair will just answer in yes or no, and you might also ask a further question in the form of a point of information, asking the chair how many ceasefire violations have taken place recently and when was the most recent one of them, right? So this is how you use points of information. Now, as far as the right to reply is concerned, as I had stated earlier, it can be raised if a country's borders, the country's sovereignty, or the nation in general has been insulted, or its particular delegate has also personally been insulted, right? That's when right to reply can be raised. Okay. Now, in this scenario too, a right to reply can be raised, but no other delegate apart from the delegates of India and China are free to raise a right to reply in such a scenario. Okay. So the delegate of Pakistan has stated that Kashmir is a sovereign territory of Pakistan. Obviously, India's borders have been questioned and its sovereignty has been questioned too. So the delegate of India can interrupt the speaker, raise a right to reply and state, Honorable Chair, the delegate of Pakistan has questioned the borders and the sovereignty of India by stating that Kashmir is a sovereign territory of Pakistan. Right? So in such a case, the delegate of India will state that since the delegate of Pakistan has made such a particular speech, we request the chair to make the delegate of Pakistan apologize. You can ask for a verbal apology or a written apology and make him retract or rephrase his statements. Okay. So the delegate of Pakistan might be asked to apologize a verbal or a written apology depending on whether the chair believes that the right is in order, and accordingly he will be reprimanded in committee too. A right to reply in that way is a very strong right, okay, and it is something that in a way is quite embarrassing for delegates to have to go through, because you are supposed to be diplomats and be diplomatic at every point in time. So no delegate can make any such statement. At the same point in time, the delegate of China too might be free to raise a right to reply against Pakistan, because I said a part of northeast Kashmir does belong to China, but no other delegate seated can raise a right to reply because their sovereignty or borders have not directly been questioned, right? So every other delegate in such a scenario can raise a point of order because there has been a factual inaccuracy, while only the delegates of India and China can raise a right to reply. I hope that helps you all understand the difference between a point of order and a right to reply, because a lot of delegates often get confused between these two. So remember, when it's related to your nation directly and when your sovereignty has been questioned, raise a right to reply. However, if there's a factual inaccuracy or a procedural inaccuracy, raise a point of order. In the event that a point of order is deemed to be in order by the chairperson will ask that particular delegate who has made the particular speech to either retract or rephrase his statements. Likewise, in the case of a right to reply, but an apology is also required in that case. So we have discussed the 4 points and 1 right. Now I will come to the last part, which is in-committee formal documentation and the final draft resolutions. Now please note, it is quite difficult for me to really discuss and explain out how this entire thing takes place on video in the manner that I am talking. So it's difficult to explain on video, but I will try my best to actually provide you with the basics of formal documentation. So the entire purpose of MUNs is of course to debate and deliberate, and at the end of it, come up with a particular document which takes down the solutions that you all have discussed. In the case of TIMUN, since we are organizing this in collaboration with the United Nations Information Center of India and Bhutan, the final document, which is called a draft resolution that you all will be coming up with, will be forwarded to the UNIC and will also be considered by the UNESCO and UNICEF, who have actually decided to support TIMUN 2014, and this happens to be probably one of the only conferences ever to take place in India which has gotten that kind of support from these 2 wonderful UN bodies, right? Okay, that was just a bit of PR, but I shall continue with formal documentation. Now, as far as formal documentation is concerned, so as I said, after a few moderated caucuses and unmoderated caucuses, you decide that you need to come up with some in-committee formal document. Now, this is called a working paper, okay? Now, this is only for reference within the committee. A working paper states down the possible causes, effects and solutions that you have discussed during debate and during unmoderated caucuses, and it basically shows the consensus within committee. So a particular delegate, let's say the delegate of South Korea, might decide to come up with a working paper in relation to the particular agenda, and working papers are not all-encompassing with reference to the agenda. They will cover certain aspects of it. If we are discussing the issue of Kashmir, it will really be related to, let's say, human rights violations in Kashmir, because that is probably discussed, or extremism in Kashmir, and will come up with particular causes, effects and solutions for the same. Okay? It does not have any particular format. As I said, it is only for reference within committee. However, it is often suggested that you draft it in the same way that a draft resolution is drafted, because it makes it easier to incorporate those points into a draft resolution later on. A working paper has a particular author at most times, or a sponsor and some signatories, but all those points, as I said, since it has no particular procedure, will be decided upon by the chair. However, one thing that we will be following with reference to working papers is that they will be introduced and read out in committee. Okay? There will have to be a motion to introduce a working paper that will have to be passed by a simple majority after seconds and oppositions. Once it's introduced, there might be a moderated caucus to discuss the working paper. There will be no amendments to a working paper. Okay? And after this, we shall be allowing votes on working papers. A motion to move into vote will have to be introduced. Okay? Whenever you have to move into vote on any formal document, there first has to be a motion to move into vote on a particular working paper or a draft resolution, seconds oppositions, and then the motion to move into vote is introduced. Okay? Working papers will be voted upon and will be passed or failed based on a procedural vote, a simple majority. You don't require 2/3 majority, but a simple majority for it. Right? So after discussions are taking place on that particular working paper without amendments, the working paper will be voted upon, and depending on whether it passes or fails, it will be recognized in committee. If it passes, it can be recognized as a part of something that the committee has moved to a consensus on, and can be referred to in future speeches of delegates during committee. If it fails, it is just struck off committee history. You cannot refer to it either. Okay? So a lot of working papers of this sort can be introduced in course of debate as you keep discussing different aspects of the particular agenda. And finally, all these different working papers come together to form what we call the draft resolution. Okay? The draft resolution is like the final document that decides the fate of the committee. Okay? It has a particular procedure. There are minor service details that need to be followed. The draft resolution has a particular sponsor. It needs a minimum number of signatories. It has to state the committee name. It has to state the agenda name. And then it has two different sections. Okay? We will be putting up a document on the internet which really discusses UNA USA procedure as well. You can look at the sample draft resolutions. Now they have two parts. The first part is the preambulatory section, which has preambulatory clauses, and the second section is the operative section, which has operative clauses. Now preambulatory clauses basically show the direction in which the draft resolution is moving. It basically gives character to the draft resolution. Okay. Now preambulatory clauses start off with a particular word that is generally a verb. It ends in ing. Okay. So it has clauses like realizing that this issue might pose a grave threat to international peace and security, recalling so and so past draft resolutions in the United Nations General Assembly, keeping in mind that human rights violations are a major issue in Kashmir, or whatever it is. So, it's not really the actual solutions, but the basis on which these solutions are being reached to. Okay? So, and the first word, the preambulatory word, as we call it, is generally in italics. You'll have to see a draft resolution to understand this better. So once you have generally there are 5 to 6 preambulatory clauses, you move on to the operative clauses, which actually are the main solutions that you're suggesting. Okay, so they generally start off with a word as suggests, or urges, or congratulates, or condemns. These are the kinds of words. So generally, as a golden rule, you can remember that the ing is replaced by an s. Though it varies depending on the word, of course. The ing in the preambulatory clauses, of course. So you will have operative clauses like condemns Pakistan for having carried out numerous ceasefire violations recently, or congratulates China for having ensured peace, security and stability in the border region between India and China, or suggests that so and so steps must be taken in order to prevent human rights violations, one strengthening of border security, to whatever it is. These points come under a particular operative clause. So operative clauses are such, and they are numbered. Okay, Preambulatory clauses are not numbered, operative clauses are numbered, and they might have subsections. So there might be operative clause 1 and subsections A, B, C, D, or whatever it is, which are suggesting further solutions under that section. So in this way, you come up with preambulatory clauses and operative clauses and form an entire draft resolution. Alright? Generally, the different working papers are combined, the working papers that are passed are combined and incorporated within a draft resolution, and of course further points are also included in it. So this is generally how formal documentation works. Now as far as draft resolutions are concerned, you are allowed to make amendments to draft resolutions. Okay. Once again, for an amendment, you will have to have a sponsor, signatory. You will have to state what amendment, whether you want to add a particular clause or you want to remove a particular clause or rephrase a particular clause or whatever it is. Okay. You have to state that amendment, have the signatories. You will have to motion to introduce the amendment. Okay. And once again, there will be discussions on whether the amendment should be introduced or not using moderated caucuses, etc. This is also how a draft resolution works. So once a draft resolution is introduced, you can raise a moderated caucus to discuss the draft resolution. After this, you might motion for amendments. There might be amendments to the draft resolution. And finally, after everything has taken place, generally there's a motion for a 2 for, 2 against. 2 delegates are allowed to speak for a draft resolution. 2 delegates are allowed to speak against it. And finally, there's a motion to move into vote on the draft resolution. Okay. Now, please note that this vote is different from the procedural vote, the simple majority vote that is carried out in almost every other case. In this case, you have a 2/3 majority vote or a substantive vote. Even for an amendment to pass, you require 2/3 majority vote or a substantive vote. It's also called a substantive vote. So a 2/3 majority vote requires 2/3 of the total members present and voting to vote in favor of a particular draft resolution. Okay, for it to pass and be recognized. Now, as far as voting is concerned on draft resolutions or amendments, it is slightly more complicated than delegates simply raising their placards. There are 3 rounds of voting. Okay, so I shall now be explaining voting, which according to me is the last aspect that I am going to be covering. So now we will be discussing substantive voting or 2/3 majority voting. So when a motion to move into vote on a particular amendment or on the draft resolution is raised and passed, you are now into final voting. It's also called final voting because you're finally voting on the draft resolution. Now, observers are not allowed to vote. Observer nations as well as observer members of a particular committee are not allowed to vote. In fact, you all will be asked to move out of committee. All the press members, all the people who are just viewing committee will have to move out because this is something that is quite solemn. Alright, it is only a pure in-committee and non-observer related vote. So only those members will be allowed to vote. And there are 3 rounds of voting whenever it comes to substantive voting. Okay. Now it's roll call voting, so every delegate is asked to vote separately. So we go generally in alphabetical order, starting with the delegate of Azerbaijan if he is the first delegate today, and moving on to the delegate of Yemen if he is the last delegate in committee. Right? So we generally go in alphabetical order. Now remember when I told you that when you give your attendance, you are either allowed to state present or present and voting. If you state present, you are allowed to abstain in this case. And if you have stated present in voting, you cannot abstain. Now I'll explain the first round of voting to you. In the first round of voting, you will have 6 options. You can either say yes, which means you're in favor of the draft resolution and all its points. You can say no, which means you're against the draft resolution and all its points. You can say yes with rights, in which case you are in favor of the draft resolution and you want to present your rights. You want to state why you are in favor of it. You can state no with rights, in which case you are basically saying that you are against the draft resolution and you would like to state your rights for it, I mean why you are against it. In the 5th case, you can pass, okay, which means you do not want to vote in this round of voting, you will vote in the next round or the 3rd round of course. And the final option that you have is abstaining. Now only those delegates who have said only present are free to abstain. Okay, present and voting delegates cannot abstain. So out of these 5 options, you can choose one option. The chairperson will be keeping track of all the votes. Now after the first round of voting gets over, you move into the second round of voting. In the second round of voting, all the delegates who have said yes with rights or no with rights will get an opportunity to present their rights for a certain amount of time, generally 30 seconds. You basically state why you are voting for or against that particular draft resolution. Okay. So here you are basically trying to lobby on a formal level, and all those delegates who have said pass you're trying to get them to vote in favor or against the draft resolution. Okay. So this is the second round of voting. Each one of y'all will get an opportunity in alphabetical order probably. And the third and the final round is when you have only 3 options, and this is like the final vote. So you can either say yes, you can say no, or abstain. Generally the delegates who have already said yes with rights, or yes or no with rights, do not change their vote, they just say yes or no. Okay. And finally the delegates who have said pass are free to either say yes or no. And delegates who have abstained, of course, will have to say abstain. So you have 3 options. You can either say yes, you can say no, or abstain. Okay, 3 options. So all those who have passed have to vote one of these 3, and the remaining have to maintain their vote. So based on these votes, finally, after these 3 rounds of voting, the chair does his tabulation and calculates whether 2/3 majority is fulfilled or not. So if there is 2/3 majority, that particular draft resolution or amendment passes, and if there is no 2/3 majority, that particular draft resolution or amendment fails. Okay. I'll just recap this entire substantive voting section of procedure. I've recapped everything else according to me. So there are 3 rounds of voting. In the first round, you are either allowed to say yes, no, yes with rights, no with rights, pass, or abstain. Abstain, only those delegates can abstain who have stated only present during attendance on that particular agenda. All those who have stated present in voting cannot abstain. Okay. This is the first round of voting. At the end of the first round of voting, we move into the second round, wherein all those delegates who have stated yes with rights or no with rights get to present their rights. Okay. They get to state why they are voting against the draft resolution or why they are voting in favor of it. And the third and the final round is when you have only 3 options. You can either say yes, no, or abstain. Alright. So all those delegates who have stated pass have to either say yes, no, or abstain. Have to decide one of these 3. And at the end of this, if there is 2/3 majority, the amendment or draft resolution passes. And if there is no 2/3 majority, the amendment or draft resolution fails. Now please note, once substantive voting comes to an end on a particular draft resolution, that particular agenda and discussion on it comes to an end as far as committee is concerned. So if the draft resolution passes, it means that the committee has been successful in discussing a particular agenda and coming to a solution on it. And if it fails, it means that the committee fails in relation to it. But once a single draft resolution has been voted upon, discussion gets over. We do not allow multiple draft resolutions. Okay. So once discussion on one agenda gets over, we move on to the next agenda, and the similar procedure is followed. So according to me, I think I have discussed every possible section of procedure that I can think of. There might have been a couple of things that I might have missed out on. Of course, I did not discuss special speakers list because that's something that generally is not introduced, and since a lot of beginners will be watching this, I thought it's not really necessary. This is something that your chairs will explain to you all. I did not explain the law of disruption to you all. This is something when multiple motions are raised, there's something called a law of disruption, and your chairs will once again explain the law of disruption to you, and you all will understand it when it is practically applied. Alright? And a few things apart from this, there is also something called a motion to divide the question or motion to vote on a draft resolution clause by clause. Now these motions are raised when you do not want to vote on the draft resolution as a whole, but probably want to divide it into various sections. So you raise a motion to divide the section, motion to divide the question, and then you divide the draft resolution into, let's say, operative clauses 1 to 3, 3 to 6, and 7 to 9 or whatever it is. Okay? And then you vote on each one of these sections separately. So that is called a motion to divide the question. And motion to move into voting on the draft resolution clause by clause, you vote on each clause of the draft resolution, and if a particular clause fails, if there is no 2/3 majority, it is struck off the draft resolution. Okay, so this is motion to divide the question and vote on it clause by clause. And few other things. According to me, I have more or less covered everything that a first time delegate might want. So I'd like to thank you all for having heard me out as far as procedure is concerned. If you have any doubts, please feel free to email me at anansh@munworldindia.com. That is ANANSH@munworldindia.com, and I will clarify your doubts. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you all at TIMUN 2014. Okay, and please go through this well. Please research very well. Please go through the study guides very well, because this is something that our research team has worked very hard on. and that will really help you with your agenda specific research, research well in relation to your committee, and research well in relation to your country, and of course understand what your committee requires. Before we conclude, I'd like to tell you a little about TI-MUN 2014 and the parent festival Techfest, which happens to be Asia's largest festival. TI-MUN, of course, is happening from the 3rd to 5th of January 2014 as a part of Techfest, which has an amazing lecture series with some of the most eminent personalities from India and across the world coming to it. We have had eminent personalities like Amartya Sen, John Nash, Jimmy Wales, and so many other personalities from various different fields who have come as lecturers as a part of our lecture series over the years, and I'm sure this year's lecturers are even going to be better than last few years. We have wonderful exhibitions with some of the best robots from across the world displayed at various events. A lot of other displays, technical activities taking place, wonderful technical competitions which have some of the most competent teams from across the world participating. Techfest has over 20 member nations of the United Nations participating in it. So it is more like a global village of sorts, if you might want to call it that. So it is a perfect cultural scenario to be a part of when you really talk about being an MUN as well. You get to network and meet so many different people. Now this was as far as Techfest is concerned. Oh yeah, one more thing that I really forgot about is that the fun events are amazing. Being a great technical event, you can really understand the magnitude of the gaming events that take place here, and the performance nights, amazing light and sound shows, laser shows, and various other great bands and other performances that take place every single night, you know. So when you really want a stress buster and want to let your hair down and enjoy yourselves post the MUN, which will get over on 5:36, you have a wonderful number of things to do, not only within IIT, but also across Mumbai, which is the city of dreams. But I swear to God, you all will not want to move out of IIT because Techfest is so amazing. Right. Moving on with relation to TI-MUN. TI-MUN is definitely one of the biggest MUNs that is taking place in India, right? From Mumbai, of course, the city of dreams. I love to mention that because I'm a Mumbaikar, right? We have cash prizes worth rupees 1,20,000 to be won, and apart from the cash prizes, we have a lot of other wonderful gift hampers, vouchers that you can win in events even apart from TI-MUN 2014. We are being conducted under the patronage of UNICEF and UNESCO, as I mentioned earlier. This is probably the only MUN that has the patronage of not only UNICEF but also UNESCO taking place in India. Of course, we are in collaboration with the UNIC, so all the work that you do, all the draft resolutions that you come up with will be forwarded to the UNIC, and we have some of the best executive board members coming in. More importantly, we have some of the best delegates that are coming in, because I'd like to state that it is not the executive board that makes the MUN, it is not the secretary general, not the organizing committee, but the delegates. And we have the most competent delegates, and I'm proud to say so, that are going to be a part of it. And this is the best platform. It's IIT Bombay. You'll get a certificate from IIT Bombay. It's certified MUN, and you'll sure to have a wonderful time. And I hope to see a lot of you all here from across the world. And 3rd to 5th January are 3 days that you really need to note in your diaries, and make sure that you ensure that these dates are going to be when you are at IIT Bombay for TI-MUN 2014. That said, thank you so much. I hope you all got to gain out of this entire video. It's been a long video. It has been shot over 2 days, right? Which is why you probably have seen me in 2 different shirts and in different positions. There have been a lot of cuts as well. I'd really like to thank Shriyansh Jain, who's at the back of this camera and who is responsible for this entire video being shot. He is to an extent camera shy, I believe, which is why he doesn't want to come up, and he's been really busy. He's one of the main coordinators for TI-MUN. So I'd like to thank him and his entire camera crew, and see you guys at TI-MUN 2014. If you have any doubts or want to get in touch with me, please email me at anansh, that's ANANSH, @munworldindia.com. So that's anansh@munworldindia.com. Adios folks, see you at TI-MUN.